Hello and welcome to Rituals in the Dark. This is a visual novel about a lesbian couple with some horror elements woven in between. That's all I know about this, so let's get started. Aspen Draper was probably one of the last people to see the elderly Miss Lee still alive. She was definitely the first person to see her after she had died. Mrs. Lee had lived next door to Aspen as long as a teenage girl could remember, in a semi-detached house on Paradise Road. Paradise Road, despite its grandiose name, didn't live up to expectations. It was like any other street in Scarborough. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, sorry. Really grey, cramped and gently sloping down the side of the shallow hill. Pavement was usually littered with takeaway carts from kebab houses. Bins never seemed to get emptied on time, no matter how often Aspen's mother complained to the local council. At night, Aspen could hear stray cats fighting, or worse, mating, outside her window. Despite the streets and numerous floors, however, Mrs. Lee had lived there for almost all her life, or ever since I got married to Ivor, as she put it herself. Aspen had lived in Paradise Road for all of her life too, and though she'd met Mrs. Lee on many occasions, she never had the pleasure of speaking to her husband. Ivor had died before Aspen had been born. Mrs. Lee was old, though Aspen didn't quite know how old. Aspen presumed the woman must have been in her 70s or 80s, maybe even 90s, but it seemed rude to ask. The elderly Mrs. Lee was a mysterious creature with no fixed age. Maybe she's a vampire. She had looked much the same to Aspen when she was 6 and when she was 16. Mrs. Lee had changed at all over the decade. Aspen couldn't tell. Mrs. Lee exuded a constant aura of fatality and elderliness, which was further compounded by a penchant for closing her blue, roomy eyes and mumbling, "Back in my day." Aspen didn't know when exactly Mrs. Lee's day had been, but it must have been years and years ago. Decades, even. It was certainly long before Aspen had been born, and it might have been before her parents were born too. Mrs. Lee didn't seem to have any friends or family, though Aspen had lived next to Mrs. Lee for 16, borderline on 17 years. She rarely saw cars that weren't Mrs. Lee's old unused Nissan parked in the driveway. The car had probably belonged to Ivor when he was still alive. Maybe that's why Mrs. Lee never touched it. Could she even drive? The old woman seemed so very frail, with her slender wrists and her slow shuffling gait, that Aspen doubted it. Aspen had never seen any children or grandchildren, nieces or nephews grace the doorstep of Mrs. Leah's home. It was just Mrs. Leah, and occasionally the woman from the council called Rebecca, call me Bex, who came around a few times a week to buy Mrs. Leah's groceries and clean her kitchen. Thinking about it, Rebecca should have been the one to discover Mrs. Leah's body first. Surely that was her job. Rebecca was employed not only to aid the elderly woman in her twilight years, but to save any poor, wide-eyed, nail-biting neighborhood girls from stumbling upon Mrs. Leah's corpse during the winter months. But we were getting ahead of ourselves. Rebecca had shown up on that particular Sunday. Sunday was a day off, and it had been Aspen who found the body, not Rebecca. That's just how life goes. But to arrive at the point of Aspen finding Mrs. Leah's body, the old woman's eyes rolled up in her head and her mouth twisted from a sudden heart attack. We have to go back. Aspen had spent most of her life ignoring Mrs. Lee as best she could, though her mother had told her to smile and wave when she saw the old deer pottering around in the garden. That was Aspen's mother calling Mrs. Lee the old dear, and Aspen supposed she was harmless enough. Privately, however, Aspen always thought Miss Lee was a little creepy. Mrs. Lee was a small and shrunken creature, like a living specimen pickled in vinegar. Hair was very thin and white, and it was often tied back in a bun that exposed a roaring amount of baby pink scalp. Her fingers, meanwhile, were gnarled like the roots of a tree. Maybe she was a witch. Also, just notice that there's like a spider web in the corner there. Oh, and also notice the candles don't exactly have flames in them, but little ballerinas. Yeah, Mrs. Lee would sometimes meander around in her front garden when the weather was nice and her joints were up to it. She'd finger the overgrown Costa sweet peas and the pear trees that were even older and frailer than she was, with a satisfied nod, as though her plants in her garden were supposed to be dying. Maybe Mrs. Lee was so old her eyesight was so poor. She simply couldn't see her precious roses that had been hard to guard by caterpillars. Snapdragons and marigolds were overrun by weeds. Maybe she didn't know, but she knew she was too old to do anything about it. Mrs. Lee could hardly don a pair of gardening gloves and kneel down in dirt at her age. Whatever her age was. She'd throw her back out or dislocate a kneecap, and then she'd never be able to get back up again. Mrs. Lee seemed perfectly content to meander, nursing a mug of warm tea in her choppy fingers with a thick cardigan thrown over her shoulders, as she admired what had once been a pretty flower garden. Mrs. Lee saw Aspen, typically on her way back home from primary school or ballet practice. She would smile and say how big she was getting. Aspen, who always had been shy, would murmur some words of thanks at her mother's behest, then hurry indoors, where Mrs. Lee, her sad smile, couldn't reach her. Many years these were the only interactions the two had. That changed on Aspen's 13th birthday, when the old woman did something quite surprising. She brought Aspen a present. Well, brought may not have been the correct word. Mrs. Lee rarely went 3 paces past her front garden. She certainly never went into Sainsbury. That was Rebecca's job. Instead, Mrs. Lee wrapped one of her little ornaments up in a paper and put it inside a shoebox, and left it on the draper's doorstep with a card attached. The ornament was small and made of painted ceramic, though most of the paint had flaked away. It depicted a little girl in a leotard and tutu, her hair tied back with a ribbon standing on point with her arms extended. One of the girl's hands had snapped off and her nose was broken, but it was the sweetest gesture all the same. Aspen's father had been convinced the little ornament was worth a pretty penny. He took it into an antique shop to be appraised, much to his wife's irritation. "I'm not going to sell it, Penny," Mr. Draper had tried to assure his wife. "This belongs to Aspen. I want to satisfy my curiosity. You never know, it could be something special." Aspen's father incidentally worked as a curator at the Scarborough Art Gallery. He spent his days examining works of art, and he invested interest in how old and, more importantly, how expensive little trinkets like Mrs. Lee ballerina figure were. Fortunately, a quick trip to the antique shop revealed that the ballerina was almost entirely worthless, but that is neither here nor there. The car Mrs. Lee left Aspen was decorated with an image of a young rosy-cheeked girl in a pale blue dress playing with a jump rope. The card was very pastel, almost washed out, and seemed to have come from another era, maybe the 1960s or 70s. Inside the card, Mrs. Lee had written in faint and spidery hand, "Dear Athena." Mrs. Lee often got Aspen's name wrong. "I hope you like your present. I saw it and reminded me of you. I know you practice ballet, and I thought you might get more enjoyment out of it than I do. Love, Marguerite." Up until that day, Aspen hadn't known what Mrs. Leah's first name was. She'd always called her Mrs. Lee, or Leah. She'd never even stopped to consider that Mrs. Leah might have a first name at all. It seemed almost inconceivable. Mrs. Leah's name, Marguerite, didn't really suit her. The name was too light and too dainty. Conjured up images of pretty dark-haired girls in red ruffled dresses, dancing beneath the moonlight. Not an elderly woman in a frumpy clothes, nodding benignly at clusters of worm-eaten primroses. Maybe Miss Leah had been more like Marguerite in the past. Maybe her white hair had been dark and she had worn red ruffles, and she had danced the night away. She must have been young and vivacious and full of life once upon a time. Maybe it had been when Ivor was still alive. however long ago that was. But Aspen could imagine it. Aspen didn't want to call Miss Leia Marguerite. For some reason, it made her feel sad. It felt too much like a wasted opportunity. Past time that would never ever come back. Miss Leia was always and would always be Mrs. Leia to Aspen. Revelation of Mrs. Leia's full name, however, was not the crucial takeaway from that letter. It's clear that, though Mrs. Leia and Aspen had only exchanged the briefest of greetings over the last 13 years, Mrs. Leia had been paying more attention to Aspen than she herself had ever realized. True, she had gotten Aspen's name wrong. Aspen was quite an unusual name, not very Yorkshire. Then again, neither was Althea. But Mrs. Leia knew enough about Aspen to know that she took ballet classes. At least she had taken ballet classes. Aspen had quit when she started secondary school. Going to lessons every Friday had been a painful experience. Doing ballet overall looks very painful from some of the injuries I have seen over the internet. Anyway, the ballet mistress, one Mrs. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that word. I'll just call her Mrs. Prio, who hailed from, of course she's Russian, that definitely looks like a Russian name, and whose name Aspen could not pronounce, was very strict, and if she was bad, the other girls were worse. Aspen attended ballet class from the age of 5 with a childish dream of someday being a dancer. Young girl soon learnt, however, that she was not and would never be as charming, flexible, or beautiful as all the other little swans. She just didn't have the knack. Aspen had already given up on her dancing dreams, and Mrs. Leia bequeathed her the tiny ballerina, but it was a thoughtful gift nonetheless. It was very kind of her, said Aspen's mother, Penny. You should go over to her house and thank her. Aspen hadn't wanted to go to Mrs. Leia's house and thank her. She would have rather stuck her fingers in a toaster. I mean, that's pretty much me every day. Either that or in the bathtub. But anyway. Now, don't be like that, Penny said, tutting. Mrs. Leia's an old, lonely woman. She needs some company. And she did send you a gift. She should show a bit of appreciation. Aspen's mother could be quite assertive when she wanted, and the young girl knew there was no getting around her. She had to go visit Mrs. Leia, and so she did. One Sunday morning, her hair neatly braided, wearing a blue, whatever that was, dress, Aspen walked through Mrs. Leia's overgrown front garden and knocked on her door. She intended to say a quick thank you for the gift and bolt, but Mrs. Leia had other ideas. A smile betraying just the slightest twinge of discomfort. Mrs. Leia had arthritis, and was smiling and seemed to hurt her. The old woman ushered Aspen inside. What could she do? She had Penny, who was always anxious about maintaining good relationships with the neighbors, would have flayed her. So Aspen hesitated through, though she was... So Aspen, hesitant though she was, stepped inside. When Mrs. Leia closed the wooden front door behind her, Aspen couldn't help but feel like she was one of the children from Hansel and Gretel. Was Mrs. Leia going to lock her in a cage, cook her in the oven? Aspen never met such a grotesque end. Mrs. Leia struggled to pick up her reading glasses, let alone 13-year-old girls. There's no way she would have crammed Aspen into her oven, and anyway, it wasn't big enough. This was no fairy tale, and Mrs. Leia's designs were of a far less sinister nature than any wicked witch. She just wanted somebody to talk to, and that was how Aspen became Mrs. Leia's unwilling confidant. Almost every Sunday, rain or shine, Aspen would show up at Mrs. Leia's house for mid-morning tea. Mrs. Leia's fingers trembled something awful, and her movements were slow and shuffling, but she always insisted on making the tea herself. Not content to serve Aspen the same blends every visit, she instructed Rebecca to buy all sorts of different leaves during her big Saturday shop at the nearby Tesco. Sitting in one of the overstuffed armchairs in Mrs. Leia's living room, which was strangely uncomfortable despite being piled high with cushions, Aspen would sample teas of varying flavours. Tea was often served with biscuits or chocolates, pink wafers, ginger nuts, custard creams, chocolate fingers, or bourbons. Mrs. Leah never ate any of the biscuits herself. She laughed and said she was on a diet. That would stop her from playing her young guest with sweets, though, and Aspen was too worried about sending her to say no. Tongue burning from the too hot tea, Aspen tried to drink it as quickly as possible, and her stomach churning from too much chocolate, Aspen would sit there and let Mrs. Leah talk. Mrs. Leah talked about a large number of things during her visits, but Aspen could never remember much of it. Mrs. Leah talked about people Aspen had never met, all of them dead, buried, and places Aspen had never been. Sometimes Mrs. Leah managed to get Aspen's name right. More often than not, she called her Althea. And the whole while, Aspen, who began to wonder if she was called Althea, after all, sat there and smiled. Her clock ticked slowly, counting away the seconds, minutes, and hours Aspen would never get back. Mrs. Leah knew Aspen wasn't particularly interested in, whatever that French word is. She would never give any indication of it. Maybe she was too lost in her own reminiscence to realize how uncomfortable she made her young guest. Maybe she was so blind she simply couldn't see it. Either way, regardless of Aspen's personal feelings, the sad and somber tea parties continued for several years. Routine more familiar than clockwork eventually came to an end, however. It came to an end in the most gruesome manner. 3 years later, on one January morning. I feel like this cheery music is not very fitting over in this last sentence. It had been unpleasantly cold during winter. According to the news, they were going through a cold snap. Icy winds blowing from the sea, and the wind howled despairingly at night. Aspen walked to school wearing 2 sweatshirts beneath her coat, which made a little difference. The time she got to her classroom, her fingers felt so frozen she worried they might shatter. Aspen's visits to Mrs. Leah didn't abate during the cold period. Though Aspen felt chilled to the bone, Mrs. Leah seemed to be doing well for herself. As well as a woman of indeterminate age could do, at least. Mrs. Leah didn't look any sicker than she usually did, and though she complained that arthritis was playing her up, these were the same complaints Aspen had heard for the last 3 years. Aspen didn't pay it any heed. Not until one particular visit. Aspen sat on Mrs. Leah Brown's couch in an equally brown living room, which smelled, strangely enough, of chopped liver, her hands in her lap. Outside, the wind howled. Mrs. Leah was in the kitchen. She'd gone to brew the tea and play out the biscuits, as per her normal routine. Aspen had offered to help, but Mrs. Leah waved this small act of kindness aside. "It's very kind of you, dear," she said. "But I'm not infirm just yet. I can take care of it myself. You sit down and read a magazine." Being to the fault, Aspen sat down, but she didn't read a magazine. Mrs. Leah was subscribed to Woman's Weekly and Woman at Home, neither of which Aspen found riveting. Instead, Aspen watched the clock. Minutes slowly passed. 1, then 2, then 5. Still, Mrs. Leah did not come back from the kitchen. Though Mrs. Leah often took her time brewing the tea and playing the biscuits, she did have her arthritis to contest with. She didn't normally take that long. Aspen wouldn't have been so troubled if she could have heard the sound of the old kettle brewing or cupboard slamming, but everything was curiously quiet. So Aspen got to her feet, heart pounding with trepidation. Already she knew something was wrong, and exited the living room. She walked through the hallway, sidestepping an old pair of Mrs. Leah's slippers, a little wooden tabletop with a chunky telephone, made her way to the kitchen. "Mrs. Leah?" she said softly, questioningly. "Mrs. Leah?" But there was no reply. Aspen stood by the kitchen door, which was closed. She felt sick. The moment she already knew, via some deep primordial instinct that lay dormant inside each and every one of us, that if she opened the door, there would be no going back. Life would never be the same again. But Aspen shook her head. She told herself, like we all We so often tell ourselves when we know something to be true, not with facts, but with our own intuition, that she was being silly. And so, she opened the door. What Aspen saw that day stayed with her ever since, like a birthmark. The old-fashioned kettle had finished boiling. Steam was slowly rising up from the spout. 2 mugs had been set on the counter, refilled with tea leaves. They were ready to receive the warm water from the kettle, but no water was forthcoming. Plain biscuits lay by the mugs. Mrs. Leia had prepared jammy dodgers. Jam looked so red and artificial beneath the yellow lights, it almost nauseating. And as for Mrs. Leia herself, she was sitting, though perhaps sitting isn't the right word, at the kitchen table. She was leant back in a chair, fingers resting atop on tabletop and a cardigan half falling off one shoulder. And she was quite still. She was so still Aspen would have supposed she was sleeping, save for one crucial detail. Her eyes were open. Her eyes were opened so wide they were almost bulging out of her head. Mrs. Leia's milky blue irises were rolled upwards, filling a roaring amount of white, and her head was lolling. Her mouth was open too. Face was contorted into a frightening, silent scream, for no noise would come from her mouth. She was dead. It was a heart attack, the doctor said, when they arrived on the scene. It had been a quite understanding kind of death, all things considered. The old woman hadn't made a single sound. Mrs. Leia, while preparing the plate of biscuits, must have felt a stab of pain inside her chest. Accustomed to such aches and pains, she was an old woman, after all, sat down at the kitchen table and waited for the pain to pass. Mrs. Leia hadn't tried to get Aspen's attention, though perhaps the thought had flitted through her mind. She hadn't wanted to worry her guest. Maybe Mrs. Leia had always known, though she never admitted it, that Aspen found their weekly tea parties a chore. The woman was aware she was imposing on the young girl, but how could she help herself? Aspen was the only company she had other than Rebecca. Mrs. Leia hadn't wanted to cause more trouble than she had already, so she sat there, her body racked with pain, while the kettle brewed and very silently, very politely passed away. All things considered, it was quite a British way to go. That's some dark humor for you. Maybe one could have even called it noble, brave, heroic. But the thought of Mrs. Leia suffering silently, too anxious to ask Aspen for help, only made the young girl feel guiltier. But if she could have done something. Aspen had done nothing. By the time she realized something was amiss, it was already too late. That was the first time Aspen had seen a dead body outside of the scenes in detective dramas or movies. She hoped it would be the last. Fortunately, none of her classmates or even her friends would ever let her live it down. Ooh, I really love the portraits. They're really cute. They're really pretty too. Definitely liking it. Okay, so did it really happen next door? That's right. These almost remind me of Wednesday and her friend from the Wednesday TV show. Anyone else seen that? That's where you found her body. Yeah. Ew, how creepy. Pippa glanced about Aspen's bedroom, which was joined, though separated by a lilac wall, to what had once been Mrs. Leia's house. I doesn't feel living next to a place where a body was found. Doesn't feel like anything, really. Oh, come on, it has to feel like something. Doesn't it creep you out? Not particularly. Have you heard any strange noises at night? What kind of strange noises? Well, I don't know. Wailing, crying, anything like that? No. Have you ever stepped into any cold patches of air, or felt shivers run down your spine? Well, Aspen thought for a moment, in a half-hearted attempt to oblige her friend, then shook her head. Wow. Aspen had been fairly, whatever that was, but Pippa looked impressed all the same. She whistled beneath her breath. Still seriously creepy. I'd be so freaked out if I had to live next to a spooky old house like that. Ooh, who's this? Spooky. Black eyes raised a neatly plucked eyebrow. This isn't a horror movie, we're not little kids. I know, but it's the thought of it. Can you imagine? Aspen bit her lower lip. Didn't need to imagine. He'd already seen Mrs. Lee's dead body. Pippa hadn't. Maybe that was why she sounded so gleeful about the whole sorry affair. House looks so run down too. Garden's a mess and the windows are all boarded up. Guess nobody's moved in yet. I don't think anybody would want to. It'd be quite a hard sell for even the most charismatic of real estate agents. And here we are in the kitchen. It's located near the back of the house, away from the road. It's got windows looking out the garden, a refrigerator, a washing machine, an oven. If you look right to your right, that's where the previous occupant was found stone cold dead, at the breakfast table. But it makes you think about the briefness of life, doesn't it? It's a short candle. So months went by and nobody moved into Mrs. Lee's house. Except the squatters. Squatters broke in through the window and probably stole most of the stuff inside the house. None of Mrs. Lee's possessions had been moved, but she had no relatives to collect them and she hadn't left a will. Squatters banged about in Mrs. Lee's house until the early hours of the morning. It was such a racket, Aspen's mother complained to the local council. Council got to the house boarded up, but that was about it. No remains of Mrs. Lee's belongings. She loved her scented cushions and her little china figures and her floral rugs that smelled strangely musky, were still shut inside, waiting for an owner who would never return. Garden which had brought Mrs. Lee such joy was now deader than ever, if such a thing was possible. Weeds had overrun the snapdragons and staffed the marigolds, and the roses were more holes than flowers. But despite that, life continued on. Continued on for girls like Kai and Pippa, at least who were completely divorced from the memory of Mrs. Lee's sightless eyes and twisted mouth. But it didn't for Aspen. Not properly. How could it whenever Aspen closed her eyes, she saw the image of Mrs. Lee's dead body beneath her lids, like a grotesque tattoo. Again, this music does not really fit the scene at all. People leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. What was it like seeing it? How did it make you feel? Kai, who had disdained down to find out, wrinkled her nose. I bet it was disgusting. Look, you guys. Aspen shifted on the edge of the bed, fingers linked together, bare right foot twitched against the carpet. I don't want to talk about it. Why not? We're friends, aren't we? We are friends, but... You don't need to tell anyone else, but you could tell us. Scout's honor. You've never once been a scout. It's a figure of speech. Well, can't really remember. More than 5 months ago. Liar. What? People just don't forget things like that. At least I wouldn't. Too bad we're not all geniuses like you, Lakai. Not a genius. I just bothered to study for my exams. I'm like a certain somebody. Oh, okay. Such a la-di-da. It was dark outside, beyond Aspen's drawn curtains, and the three girls were sitting on the edge of Aspen's bed in their pajamas. While Aspen and Pippa were dressed demurely, Kai was attired in something a little more revealing. Kai's nightwear, if it could be called such a thing, was a very sheer nightgown with thin struts that shone pearl white, with dim glow of Aspen's bedside lamp. Aspen wondered if it was too cold in Scarborough, which was by the seafront, to wear such skimpy clothes, but perhaps Kai's body was still attuned to the warmth of the Indian summers, despite the fact her parents had moved to England when she was still a child. It wasn't yet midnight, and the three girls wouldn't be going to sleep for several more hours. That's how sleepovers worked. There were rarely, if ever, any sleep involved. But Lakai had insisted that they change it to their nightwear as soon as 10 o'clock came around. Kai said she felt more comfortable in her pajamas, but Aspen privately thought she just wanted to show off her new nightgown. Almost all of Kai's things were new. Kelly was rich and she had no qualms about flaunting it. Kai flaunted quite a lot, thought Aspen, as she, admired her friend's slender legs. Come on, Aspen. Pippa has been some more stereotypical British friend who had perpetually flushed cheeks and ginger hair powders. You've been really nice to you about this whole thing. I mean, we didn't get on your case too much when we found the old lady, did we? Maybe not, but everyone else did. Aspen hung her head. Dark hair fell in front of her eyes, obscuring her face. After Aspen found the body of Mrs. Leah, she became something of a local celebrity. Aspen hadn't told everyone about her discovery, but the news had travelled fast. Jenny's mother worked at a local hospital. She'd been one of the first people to hear about Mrs. Leah's fate. Jenny's mother had told Jenny all about the awful affair, and how traumatizing it must have been for everyone involved. It wouldn't have been half as traumatic if Jenny's mother had adhered to basic confidentiality clauses. Jenny had told Anna, Anna told Lucy, and Lucy, being Lucy, told the world. When Aspen returned to school on Monday, a wiser but sadder girl, she was suddenly thrust into the unwanted, unasked for role of a celebrity. Everyone wanted to know what finding a dead body had been like. He wanted precise details, right down to the volume of saliva trickling from Mrs. Leah's open mouth. Aspen, who had always been a bit on the awkward side, or flower if you like, had shied away from these queries. She didn't like being on the spotlight at the best of times. She certainly didn't enjoy reliving those sickening seconds when she had stumbled upon Mrs. Leah's body at the breakfast table. If she had to be famous for something, she'd rather be famous for being funny and audacious, like Pippa, or beautiful and clever, like Lakai. But Aspen wasn't funny and audacious, she certainly wasn't beautiful, and though her grades were good, they weren't really as good as Lakai's. Aspen was quiet and soft-spoken. She really raised her hand in class, even when she knew the answer to the question. It didn't seem worth the effort. In lieu of having any real abilities or noteworthy achievements, Aspen became famous for finding a corpse. It wasn't much of a claim to fame. In fact, the whole thing was quite depressing. That word surrounding Aspen died down within a few weeks, once her classmates realized it'd be easier to pry juicy gossip from Mrs. Leah's cold blue lips than Aspen's. But a faint undercurrent of intrigue remained. On the day forth, Aspen knew she'd never be regarded as Aspen Drapers anymore, not even among her teachers. She was and always will be the girl who discovered a dead body. 6 months had passed since then, but Aspen still couldn't escape from the ghostly memory of Mrs. Leah. Will you tell us what she looked like? I want to know. I don't want to talk about it. But if you don't tell us, I'll spend the whole night thinking about it, and then I won't get any sleep. It's the uncertainty that kills me. Aspen didn't reply. Instead, she ducked her head, idly tracing patterns on her bedspread. There we go. To Aspen, it was the certainty that really unsettled her. She could try and explain it, but somehow she didn't think people would understand. It was a little like that word in Harry Potter. The thestrals in Harry Potter. Aspen knew she had taken great comfort in her favourite childhood books after finding Mrs. Leah's dead body. Death had only made sense to people who were unfortunate enough to see it, while those who hadn't could never hope to understand how frightening real it was. Well, you're no fun. Pippa patted and folded her arms, as if talking about a dead woman could ever be fun. And by remaining silent, Aspen had cruelly robbed her of a diverting amusement. I'm sorry. Aspen apologized, head bowed, because she didn't know what else to say. What was there to say? Well, it's only 11. Need to do something fun to pass the time. People wondered for a few moments, tapping a finger against her lower lip before... her eyes lit up. Maybe we should play a game. I don't want to play any of your silly games. I would chip a nail. Or could chip a nail. Won't be a silly game, Lakai. It'll be real mature, I promise. I highly doubt it coming from you, but since Aspen's parents weren't here, we can really go all out. What do you mean exactly? I mean, Pippa drummed her fingers against the bedside table, perhaps in an attempt to build anticipation. She played Truth or Dare. Aspen felt her stomach sinking through her body to the bottom of her feet and all the way down to the floor. All of a sudden, she felt sick. Aspen played Truth or Dare with Pippa during their sleepovers before. Aspen still bore the scars to that day. Pippa's imagination was inexhaustible, and it never failed to conjure up disgusting dares and excruciating truths. Once Pippa made Aspen eat a worm. Another time Pippa made Aspen climb a tree or climb inside the washing machine. Aspen's mother found her. She'd almost hit the roof. She had a Pippa who'd been 6 years old at the time. Made her mother to come pick her up immediately. Her mother had been there now. She never would have let Pippa play such a dangerous game. Aspen's mother wasn't there. Neither was her father. Aspen's parents were away on a cruise around the Mediterranean. Cruise had been booked almost a year in advance. Tickets were hard to come by. Peter and James had offered to cancel with their daughter when their daughter found Mrs. Leah, of course. They'd worried that being all alone in the house next to a sealed-off mortuary where Mrs. Leah's corpse had been found might disturb their only daughter. Aspen, however, had reassured them that she'd be alright. In fact, she insisted they go. She wasn't a child. She was almost 17, and she could look after herself. If she ever felt overwhelmed by the sheer presence of Mrs. Leah's memory, she could invite Pippa and Lakai over. Mother liked Lakai. She thought she was sensible. When it came to Pippa, she was a little less keen. Fortunately, inviting Pippa and Lakai over seemed to be doing more harm to Aspen's tenuous mental state than good. Aspen was beginning to wonder whether she might have been better off alone after all. Nothing but her memories for company. At least they couldn't ask too many probing questions. Make her climb into any washing machines. It's Truth or Dare. Kai, who'd met Pippa and Aspen in secondary school and didn't know anything about the washing machine incident, frowned. What is it exactly? It's simple. One player gets to be in charge of the other two. Leader asks the others Truth or Dare. They pick Truth. They had to answer any question they asked truthfully. Or they can pick Dare. Then Leader can give them a command and they have to fulfill it. It's like the law. Can the leader pick any Truth or Dare? That's right. Within reason. I see. Interesting. Aspen looked at Lakai hopefully. She prayed that her friend would look down her nose at the proposed party game, as she did with so many things, and deride it as being beneath her. Well, I suppose it isn't too childish if you ask the right questions. Aspen's face blanched. Kai had let her down, and she didn't even seem to realize it. You never played Truth or Dare with Pippa before, have you? No, I haven't. Why? Is there something I need to know? It's just, her dares can be quite creative. What? You still sore about the washing machine thing, Aspen? Aspen was literally sore about it now, but she had been at the time. The parents who had acquired a large fancy washing machine didn't get it from James's father. It was made for trousers and jumpers, not a 6-year-old girl. Aspen had always been short and slight, but climbing into that washing machine had been quite a squeeze. She'd been terrified she wouldn't be able to get back out again. She managed to bruise her arm most fabulously. They'd been brewed purple and green for weeks afterwards. Kai, who was none the wiser, blinked curiously. What washing machine thing? Yeah, it's a long story. Don't get bent out of shape about it, Aspen. It was years ago. Not that immature. Kept making little balls with the soldering iron in tech last term and flicking them at Colin with your ruler. Well, he deserved it. Kept making fun of my hair. Langley wasn't very happy when he found out about it. Mr. Langley isn't happy about anything, stupid old git. Pippa huffed at the injustice of it all, arms folded. Pippa was something of a wild child. She wasn't coercing 6-year-olds into washing machines. Granted, that had only happened once. She was getting into arguments with Colin Murphy and his friends about her hair. Aspen sometimes wondered if Pippa would have been less worried if she didn't get teased about her hair so often. Maybe Pippa acted loud and bright to deter people from making rude comments. Not that it ever worked. Anything, it made her even more of a target. Anyway, enough of that. We would collect our hands together. Truth or dare, let's start. Do we have to? Of course we have to. We've already decided. We have? Aspen looked at Lakai. Do you really want to play? Why not? It might be interesting. But don't look so sad, Aspen. I'm not going to make you get into any more washing machines. You wouldn't fit. That had deterred Pippa in the past, but Aspen decided to keep that. It was 2 against 1, she couldn't win. Aspen had very few friends as it was. She didn't want to alienate the only friend she had somehow miraculously managed to cling to throughout secondary school. Strange though they were. Alright, we can play if you really want to. Great, I knew you'd see it my way. Our way? That's right. So, Pippa smiled mischievously. Aspen didn't like that smile. She didn't like it one little bit. Since I'm the one who decided on the game, I think I should go first. Any objections? None here. I guess not. Great, then I'll ask you first, Lakai. Since you never played before, truth or dare? Truth. Kai answered without batting an eyelid. Looked utterly calm and composed in a sheer nightgown, almost like a stone effigy. Right then, since you never played before, I'll ask you something that really makes you squirm. I don't squirm. Harry was right. She didn't squirm. Not even when the boys at school made fun of her foreign name, or her foreign family, or her teeth, which were slightly crooked and seemed overly large in her small, delicate mouth. Kai hadn't even squirmed in biology when Mr. Peters, whom Aspen suspected was a sociopath, showed them videos of live maggots being picked out of people's skin. Yeah, I'm surprised he's even a teacher. Kai never blushed. It's almost as though her bronze skin was completely bloodless. Well, if you're sure, then how about this? When you who do you usually think of? Pippa. That's one size 1. Face flushed scarlet, as though she'd been asked the question, not Lakai. Can't say that. Say what? No, I mean it. That's personal. That's the whole point, stupid. Wouldn't be truth or dare if it wasn't. But that, I don't know why you get so worked up anyway. That's Lakai, not you. Unless you'd like to join in. No, that isn't it. Simply thinking about something so personal, let alone sharing it with her friends, was enough to make Aspen blush to the tip of her ears. I think it's a bit too far. The question is definitely intrusive. Oh, aren't you going to answer? Just so you know, if you can't answer a question or complete a dare, you'll be punished. How will we be punished? Maybe I'll text my brother and tell him you have a crush on Malachi. No thank you. Do you hate my brother that much? Don't hate him, I just want to acknowledge his existence. His older brother Aaron was 19, and He managed to get into his university of choice, or any university for that matter, was waiting to retake his A-levels while working part-time at McDonald's. He was the kind of person who liked to wear offensive shirts, tell offensive jokes, and laugh too loudly at things that weren't very funny. Yeah, one of those guys. Evan, Lakai, and Aspen went to Pippa's house and tried to flirt with Lakai, largely ignored Aspen. Lakai regarded him much like one would regard an insect and keep a distance. Well, if you don't want to be my sister-in-law, better ask the question truthfully, please. Who do you think about? Kai sighed. She closed her eyes. What do you want to know? Yeah, whoever that is. Huh? People looked at the Kai blankly. Come again? He's an actor. You wouldn't have heard of him. Hey, that's not fair. You can't choose somebody we obviously you wouldn't know. Not my fault you're uncultured. Gave you an honest answer, so my turn should be over. I guess, but Pippa scowled, evidently annoyed. Alright, whatever. It's your turn now, Aspen. Truth or dare? Well, Aspen dropped her gaze to her knees. Face was still spotted light pink, with remnants of leftover embarrassment on Kai's behalf. Could have chosen truth, she supposed, but what if Pippa asked her an unpleasant, intrusive question? Thought it was painful. Would it perhaps be better to choose dare then? Pippa could think of some extremely nasty dares, but weren't they a little too old to eat worms? Plus, as Pippa had already reassured her, Aspen really was too big to fit inside a washing machine now. Go on, Aspen, the clock is ticking. Is there a time limit? Might have to impose one if Aspen keeps dithering. If you can't make up your mind, I'll punish you. Now, I wonder what I'll do. Aspen pitched pale face turned paler still. Pippa's intended to punish her regardless of what she did. Might as well make a decision now and get it over with. And so it was, stomach tying itself into knots. Aspen slowly said. Oh, I was hoping I'd get to actually choose, but I guess not. Then I choose dare. Alright, now that's what I'm talking about. Pippa punched her fist into the air triumphantly. Kai, meanwhile, raised one of her slender brown eyebrows. That was brave of you. I just hope it wasn't too foolish. Don't worry, Aspen. I know you're a baby, so I won't go too hard on you. Make it easy. Don't make it too easy. Wouldn't be fair after what you asked me. Okay, whose side are you on anyway? I don't take sides. That would be immature. Well, don't worry, you two. I have a really good idea for your dare, Aspen. You're not going to shut me up inside a small, close spaces, are you? They studied the Kowski of Armadillo in English that year, and Aspen didn't want Pippa getting any ideas. Don't worry so much. I might be planning to shut you up, but it won't be anywhere small or enclosed. Where then? Can you guess? Not very good at guessing games. Please, Pippa, just tell me. Crash, don't you have any imagination, do you? Alright then. And a pleasant smile captured the corner of Pippa's lips. I need to break into Mrs. Leia's house. Ugh, really? This is so stupid. Kai tutted her slender arms crossed over her chest. It was near the end of August, and though it was a cool night, it wasn't uncomfortably so. Kai stood outside Mrs. Leia's home, backlit by the garnished orange light of the nearby lamppost inside. She was still wearing her sheer nightgown, with the thin straps. The nightgown stopped at Kai's mid-thigh, excluding her knees and generous portion of slender leg. Though her otherwise bare feet were encased in a white wedged heel, the rest of the Kai was exposed to the elements. Wind ran through her short brown hair so it fluttered. It was the midnight streets, bathed with artificial light and framed by the round moon. Kai looked strangely ghostly. Pippa, meanwhile, was much more corporeal. With her pink cheeks and red hair, she was comfortably solid and real on this dark, dark night. But just how comforting was Pippa really, when it was through her continued insistence that the three girls had come outside in the first place? They were the only people outside, which was to be expected. It was almost midnight. Aspen lived on a quiet street, and it had grown quieter still once the doors and the windows of Mrs. Lee's house had been boarded up and the squatters had been driven out. It was deathly silent, save the sound of the wind through the trees and the dim, distant din of the cawing bird. The silence did little to comfort Aspen. Instead, it made her feel even more anxious. Surely it was too late to play silly games like this. If Mother had been at home, she would never have allowed Aspen to go outside at such an hour. But Mother wasn't home. She was on a boat that was slowly cruising through the Mediterranean, doubtless enjoying weather that was a good deal warmer and sunnier than as in Scarborough. Aspen swallowed. Saliva tasted like ashes. Kai's right. This is stupid. Let's go back inside, Pippa. We can't go back inside. Now that we've come all this way, you gotta do the day, Aspen. That's final. But the window's all boarded up, and so's the front door. There's no way inside. Let's go around the back. There must be somewhere you can get in. But Aspen didn't have enough time to argue back. Pippa seized hold of Aspen's hand with her own. A few minutes ago, Aspen had found the unquestionable of Pippa's body a comfort. Now it's more like a curse. Pippa dragged Aspen around the rear of Mrs. Leah's house, pushing open a small wooden gate that divided the front garden from the back. The gate was unlocked. It opened with a piercing creak that sounded far too loud in the stillness of the night. Aspen's heart pounded harder and harder. Now the three of them were standing in Mrs. Leah's back garden, or what had once been her back garden. Aspen had been herself on a few occasions when Mrs. Leah had been alive. When it was sunny, the pair of them would sometimes like tea there at the white patio garden, or patio table with the matching chairs. The table was still in Mrs. Leah's garden, and so was one of the chairs. The other was curiously absent. Moonlight illuminated the latticework pattern of the once familiar table, now rendered unfamiliar by the darkness. The front garden was overgrown. That would be nothing compared to the back. During the last 6 months, dandelions and white clovers had sprouted everywhere. Grass had grown long and unruly, with nettles nestled inside, ready to sting unsuspicious legs. Mrs. Leah's old pear tree, which she had once loved to distraction, of Ivor had planted them, seemed more crooked than ever, but maybe that was the trick of the light. Those trees had always been crooked, even when Mrs. Leah was still alive. But Aspen couldn't stand in the garden forever, marveling at what ravages time had wrought. At the precious moment, she was rather more concerned about her own imminent fate. There, I knew it. Pippa pointed at the leftmost window at the bottom of the house, which Aspen knew led into the kitchen. And what she recalled, it overlooked the sink. The basin and taps would be right underneath it. Somebody, maybe one of the squatters or else a scavenger, had removed the plywood and had stoppered up the window. The window had been smashed. The glass pane was eerily absent, like the entrance of a cave. Abandon all hope he could enter. That was something Aspen's dad used to say about a room, in jest, when she'd let her clothes and dirty plates pile up. It was from Dante, the Divine Comedy. Aspen had never read it. Aspen faced the window of Mrs. Leah's old home, face pale and bloodless. No suggestion of climbing through that window, are you? Well, how else are you going to get inside? Aspen took a step backwards. I don't think this is a good idea. You're not chickening out, are you? It's just doesn't look very safe. What if I cut myself? You'll be fine, Aspen. Stop worrying. But that window leads to the kitchen. That's where I found Mrs. Leah. Oh, I see. People swam mischievously. You're afraid you'll run into the old woman's ghost, are you? don't believe in ghosts. What's the problem? You can go in there for a few measly minutes, can't you? It wasn't a ghost Aspen was afraid of. It was her own memories. They were already starting to come back to her. Aspen knew they'd never really left. But now, her dreams were interrupted by images of Mrs. Leia slumped back in the chair with her eyes rolled back and her mouth sagging open. How could she explain that to Pippa? Pippa had never seen a dead body. She wouldn't understand. Pippa was too dynamic, too lively, too cheerful, too oblivious to even worry that one day even she would shuffle off this mortal coil. Happened to the best of us. The worst of us. Happened to everyone. It was sweet old ladies like Mrs. Leia. It might have been a bit creepy, but it never meant anything bad. But Kaya was beginning to get impatient. She glanced around Mrs. Leia's disorderly garden and frowned. You're going to go inside, Aspen. You should hurry up. Oh, are you getting colder, Kai? Not really. Kai, who had never admitted to any weakness, rolled her eyes. I'm just bored. Same here. Get your act together, Aspen. You're being boring. Pippa. Aspen looked at her friend, who didn't seem very friendly right now, with hopeful eyes. Can I change my mind? Can I say truth instead? Nope, that's against the rules. Now let you punish me. You can do whatever you want. Whatever I want? That's right. Then your punishment is to go inside Mrs. Leia's house. But that's not fair. Not fair that you're making us wait so long. I have better things to do with my time. But yeah, these two are really fucking shitty friends. Come on, Aspen, it's an old house and nothing to be scared of. You only need to go inside for a few minutes, that's all. Kai made it sound so easy, but the Kai, like Pippa, had never seen a dead body. Wasn't the one who had discovered Mrs. Leia. Didn't know how Aspen had felt when she'd pushed open the kitchen door on that day. Still innocent and unassuming to be confronted, without any warnings by death. Death really gave warnings. Death had been cruel to Mrs. Leia and had been cruel to Aspen too. It had shown her something she was too young to process, something she wasn't ready for. Now Pippa and the Kai were asking her to confront it all over again. To them, this was just a game, but Aspen had been forced to relive one of her worst nightmares. But what could she say? Pippa's fingers found Aspen's shoulders. She pushed the limp, unresisting girl onwards, towards the gaping window with its shuttered glass. Come on, Aspen, I just want you to go in there for 5 minutes tops. We'll wait for you outside. Won't go anywhere. Do you promise? That's right. Pippa smiled her Pippa smile, teeth large and white in light of the moon. Gently, tenderly, she let her hands fall from Aspen's shoulders. She intertwined her fingers with her friends and gave them a gentle squeeze. I promise. But as it transpired, climbing in the window was no easy task. Aspen might have been small for her stature, but she wasn't particularly coordinated. She had no sense of balance. That was why she quit ballet. She didn't have the knack. Aspen clumsily was intensified by her fear as she tried to maneuver herself through the empty, gaping window frame. Though the glass had long since been knocked out, the pain Aspen worried some residual shards remained, lying in wait to gouge chunks of flesh out of her unprotected hand. Aspen's fingers tensed as she lifted herself upwards. She could feel her knuckles turning white. All of a sudden, her body felt heavy, dead leaden weight. Sorry, Aspen, you can do it. What are you, a cheerleader? Just giving Aspen a bit of moral support. Looks like she could use it. Aspen was too focused on the task at hand to spare the kayak glance, but she could feel the raised eyebrow on the other girl's words. I don't suppose Aspen will ever make it as a burglar. Of course not. Aspen is a good, pure girl. Though this is technically breaking and entering. There's no breaking. The window was already broken. Besides, nobody lives here anymore. Don't think Mrs. Leah would mind. Local council might. And we'll just have to keep quiet, won't we? That was easier said than done. Pippa in excitement was making enough noise for 5 people. Sooner than she expected at least, Aspen found herself perched cat-like on the windowsill. Looked down into the kitchen, which was dark and murky. The back obscuring the moon, it was hard to see more than 3 feet into the room before her. Aspen teetered uneasily and shifted, trying to regain her balance. Not sure about this. Oh, come on, Aspen, you're almost in. I know, but... No buts, it's too late to back out now. But... You can't go inside yourself, I'll have to help you. All of a sudden, Pippa was upon her, pajamas rolled back, revealing pink forearms splashed here and there with freckles. Palms of Pippa's hands rested upon Aspen's shoulder. Now, in you go. But Pippa, don't need to worry about anything. Lakai and I will be waiting for you. You already said. Is that right, Lakai? Break a leg, not literally. Thanks for the warning. Make sure you don't run into any ghosts. Aspen knew Pippa was being silly. Was she trying to lighten the mood? But it didn't make her feel any better. At least it didn't make her feel worse. Hey, here's an idea. If you do see ghosts, why don't you take a photo of it? You brought your phone with you, right? It's in my pocket, but... Good, make sure you snap away. Don't you see any ghosts, but I'm rather curious about the house. Wonder how many of the old woman's things are still in there. Don't know, I think the squatters would have stolen most of it. Aspen gazed fitfully into the blackness that had once been Mrs. Leah's kitchen. It was in the space overlooking the back garden that Mrs. Leah had prepared cups of tea and arranged biscuits on a rose pattern of plates, all the while humming under her breath. Mrs. Leah wasn't there anymore. Only the memories remained. I hope there aren't any squatters still here. If they were, we would have heard them by now. Or they would have heard us. But what will I do if somebody is in there? Leggett? Aspen sighed. What wonderful advice. You're just fussing over nothing. Aspen, stop working yourself up. If you find anybody scary, I'll just call the police, okay? Aspen was doubtful calling the police would be a wise idea in this situation, given what she was about to do. In fact, the police might prove to be scarier than the imagined squatters. She wouldn't get arrested for this, would she? Now, make sure to take some photos. Come back in one piece. Don't talk to any strange men. Maybe you could bring back a souvenir? What sort of souvenir? Maybe one of the dead woman's hairnets? What would you do with that? Keep it as a memento? You're sick, Lakai. Says the one trying to get me into a dead woman's house. Now, in you go, Aspen. Don't forget my hairnet. Don't forget about the photos. But Aspen didn't have a chance to retaliate. That's because sudden Pippa gave her shoulders a shove. Maybe the show was supposed to be reassuring. Aspen didn't think Pippa really meant to knock her off the window ledge, but Pippa was stronger than she thought, and she often did things without really meaning to. That's how she had given Katie Neal a black eye in PE with the volleyball. Pippa hadn't meant to spike the ball quite that hard or at quite an angle, but she had hit Katie's face anyway. Katie had crumpled to the floor, twitching with pain. It was the same for Aspen now, though no volleyballs were involved. With a wide-eyed surprised shriek, Aspen felt herself falling forwards. The clock just hit the tats beneath the window as she fell, and then her back met the floor with a sickening, dull crack. Ugh. Aspen lay there for a few moments, windows staring at the ceiling. Her vision was blurry and it hurt to breathe. Her chest hurt horribly. For a few moments she worried she had cracked some of her ribs, but if that was the case, she wouldn't breathing in be much more painful. She was being ridiculous. Aspen knew she hadn't caused herself any serious damage, but when she shifted, she had the floor creak beneath her. She could feel something cold and hard beneath her back, exposed thighs and the flats of her palms. On the other side of her hand, it felt strangely warm and wet. What was that exactly? Just as though entranced, the teenage girl raised her hand before her face, turned to showing it like an exhibition in a museum. It was bleeding. A small gash in the center of her apartment, and a trickle of strawberry red blood was oozing out of it. How did that happen? Maybe it was the glass? Now Aspen thought about it. That was the most likely explanation. She must have landed on bits of long broken window, which were still scattered around the sink and on the ground. Aspen, hey Aspen. Aspen could hear a voice from beyond the window. It was obviously Pippa, though she sounded more high-pitched than usual. Aspen, are you alright? Say something. Aspen remained silent. She knew it was cruel of her, but the panic note in Pippa's voice made her feel somewhat satisfied. Well, this made her aching hand, bruised ribs, and bloody palm worthwhile. Almost. Aspen, this isn't a joke, is it? Aspen continued to lie on the floor, staring up at the ceiling. She couldn't count the sheep inside her head, trying to make her take her mind off the pain. Come on, Aspen, answer me. Let me know you're okay. Aspen didn't reply. She'd been dragged around too much that night. She was so tired of it all. She was tired of Pippa, and she was tired of Pippa's silly games. She was tired of herself for being such a doormat. She was tired of everything. Did she hit her head on something? I don't think she passed out, do you? Well, I don't know. I'm not the one who pushed her. But you didn't stop me. You said you wanted to see inside the house too. Curious, like I said, but this had nothing to do with me. You need to take some responsibility for your actions, Pippa. That's not fair. You're the one who's been charged with the Kai. Yeah, Pippa can be a bit of a bitch. Aspen's body tense, and she watched the blood trickle slowly from her palm, then sighed. She clenched her fingers into fists. Playing dead had been relatively harmless way of getting her revenge, but she didn't want Pippa and the Kai to argue. Not over her. She wasn't worth it. With a groan, Aspen forced herself to stand. She had to move gingerly so she wouldn't lacerate herself on any more shards of glass. She was lucky, she mused, that her palm was the only part of her body that she'd cut. This was held for a little light as she staggered when she pulled herself upright. Legs threatened to buckle beneath her, but she supported herself by gripping the basin of the sink with her fingers. Palm, which was still bleeding, left a red blaze streak against the model ceramic. Calm down, you two, I'm fine. Aspen, are you really alright? Yeah, just had a bit of a nasty fall. Oh, thank God. Why didn't you say anything sooner, you dirty girl? My head hurts. Well, hurry up and get out of there. You're making me worry. I am making you worry? You're the one who told me to come in here in the first place. Because it always seemed like a game when we were staying out in the garden, but it feels too real now, and... Oh, whatever, just get out there, Aspen. Sound like my grandmother. Shut up, Mackay. Kai clicked her tongue. Since Aspen's in there already, we might as well ask her to take a few photographs. Didn't you want to see what the house is like? I do, but... Aspen searched her pocket of her shorts for her mover, but her fingers brushed against nothing but fabric. She blinked, looked down at her feet, a sinking feeling inside her chest. There was a phone laying amongst the shards of glass from the shattered window. Much like the window, her poor old phone had lasted for so many years was broken. Despite web of cracks running along the screen from where it had been dropped, and the silver casing was scuffed and dented. Hesitantly, Aspen bent down to retrieve it. She tried to turn her phone on, fingers slippery with blood, but nothing happened. It's dead. Your phone? It fell out of my pocket. I think I landed on it. Well, that's all we need. Good job, Pippa. Hey, how is it my fault? You were the one who pushed her, remember? Maybe planning on reimbursing Aspen means she is your friend. Don't be stupid, I can't afford to buy her a new phone. Guys, it's alright. Wasn't alright, not really, but Aspen didn't like hearing them argue, especially not over her. I'll just buy a cheap phone to replace it. Are you sure you don't mind? It's fine. Gotta come back in now. Aspen turned ready to leave when she heard something. A voice. Are you going already? Voice was soft and distinctly feminine. There was something light and knitting about it, and as though the speaker was half speaking, half singing. There's nothing inherently malicious about these words, but Aspen felt a shiver run up her spine all the same. Now, don't look so anxious. I don't mean you any harm. Just get so boring sometimes, being on my own so often. This is the most fun I've had in a while. Aspen, what are you waiting for? I told you to get back here. Seemed like people couldn't hear the mysterious speaker. She? Aspen was sure it was she. Speaking so softly her voice could only reach Aspen's ears. But why? Who possessed that soft, feminine voice? Who was inside Mrs. Leia's house? Just how long had they been in there? Aspen, come on, stop playing around. Aspen felt her heart stammer inside her chest, like the stuck keys of an ancient typewriter. Part of her didn't want to know who the mysterious speaker was. Ignorant was bliss, after all. What she'd do upon turning around, she happened to spot something no mortal eye should ever see. A ghost? A phantom? Maybe it was something she couldn't assign words to. Not arbitrarily. Sensible sight Aspen wanted to slip out through the window without looking back. So, you're just going to obey your friend? Was she your keeper? Do you always let yourself get pushed around like that? But another slightly less sensible part of Aspen knew she couldn't be so hasty. Girl, whoever she was talking to her. She was addressing Aspen and Aspen alone. Aspen couldn't remember the last time that had ever happened. Nobody wanted to talk to Aspen. She'd become something of a celebrity after she stumbled upon Mrs. Leia's body. It was true, but the hype had soon died down. There's nothing interesting or unique about Aspen herself, with her boring black hair and dull brown eyes. People looked at Pippa because she was loud and noisy. People looked at the kite because she was foreign and beautiful, but nobody looked at Aspen. She was and always had been completely overshadowed, but not anymore. That was why Aspen turned around. Okay, I think I'm going to be leaving this off here on a cliffhanger. Yeah, if you guys want to continue this and see who's behind Aspen, link will be down below for the visual novel, so you guys can play it for yourself. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. Very intriguing story, but very dark and depressing. Okay, definitely don't like the noises that just kicked up, but yeah, definitely liking the art style as well. The character portraits are really nice and pretty, and yeah, the backgrounds are also really cool looking as well. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and yeah, we'll be moving on to the next game.